No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live episode number 33. And two-tier Keir has doubled down on his rhetoric, demonising the angry British working classes.
The disorder is intolerable. It is incapable of justification. It's clearly racist. And it does not represent the modern, forward-looking Northern Ireland that I know that this place is. The disorder...
So as the new PM prepares to release violent criminals to bang up working-class Brits who made inappropriate social media posts on Facebook and X, Elon Musk has declared that the UK is turning into a police state, while slamming Labour's Operation Orwell. So why has the British MSM and establishment been silent on the government's dystopian free speech crackdown? A special digest on that next. Also coming up today, Lee Anderson takes on the Home Office for declaring those arrested as criminals before any charges were laid. What has happened to justice in the UK? Then Philip Kiszely of New Culture Forum weighs in during today's Uncancelled Interview. Plus, King Charles finally visits the scene of the Southport Massacre and receives a response Slippery Starmer could only dream of. And what the MSM won't report on Prince Harry's and Meghan Markle's disastrous Colombian tour, that's with the Duke's biographer Angela Levin. Then in the Uncancelled after show, much more from Angela. She is, of course, the woman who wrote the book about Prince Charles. So she's going to be analysing what the Duke is going through at 40 years old. You can register to watch on our own website at www.outspoken.live. Most importantly, given everything going on, it is a safe, free of censorship, and your support at just £5 a month not only gives you 30 minutes of extra content every single weekday, it also allows us to continue making this independent daily news show. But now, let's go. Elon Musk being brave and bold as ever by pointing out the authoritarian madness sweeping Britain, which our MSM and elites are conveniently choosing to ignore, has declared the UK is turning into a police state. But two-tier Keir is continuing to double down on his aggressive rhetoric, refusing to acknowledge the vast majority of angry English folk deplore violence, yes, but are highly disturbed by the fabric of our society being torn apart. Yet in Northern Ireland yesterday, he dismissed anyone expressing discontent as racist.
The disorder is intolerable. It is incapable of justification. It's clearly racist. And it does not represent the modern, forward-looking Northern Ireland that I know that this place is. The disorder...
Helpful? No. But will it entrench the deep feeling of barely concealed fury that everyday Brits are having their concerns ignored? Without a doubt. But Slippery Starmer intends to press ahead with his dystopian plan to throw out of jail violent convicted criminals in order to find places for folk who made inappropriate posts on X and Facebook. And oh, he doesn't like being asked about the risk that such a decision poses to the safety of the public.
Prime Minister, is there any risk to the public safety from Operation Early Dawn, either in terms of policing operations that may now be postponed or from prisoners being granted bail who would otherwise not have been?
Well, these decisions are really tough decisions and nobody wants to take them. They're difficult decisions. They're having to be taken for one reason, and one reason only, and that is the terrible inheritance on prisons that we had as an incoming government from the previous government. There was a basic failure, which is a failure to have enough prison places for the number of prisoners that were being sentenced to prison. That is about as basic a failure of government from the previous government as you could possibly have got. We've had to deal with that with the additional strain of the disorder of recent weeks. But as I hope we've been able to demonstrate, we've taken tough decisions. We've been able to prove that if you commit disorder, you can be expected to be put through the criminal justice system quickly, and we will continue in that vein. But I'm not going to pretend that this isn't a challenge. We will take the necessary tough decisions on this, but we should never, ever have been put in a position that we're in today. Thank you so
But
much.
with respect, you haven't answered, is there a risk to public safety from this new operation?
We are managing that risk, and of course, these are tough decisions. But I think you've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks the way in which we've approached this, which is to make sure that any risk is mitigated, to make sure that we do have the spaces available for the prisoners that we need to be held in prison. We've managed that against very difficult circumstances, I can tell you. And for my part, I think the response of criminal justice to the recent disorders has been a major reason that the disorders have subsided for the time being. Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Well, listening to that, no wonder Elon Musk declared the plan to be Operation Orwell. And Operation Orwell is sending these types of people to prison while paedophiles get no jail time whatsoever. Julie Sweeney, the 53-year-old from Kidsgrove who lived a quiet, sheltered life in Cheshire and is the primary caregiver to her sick husband, who made an inappropriate post on Facebook that she instantly regretted. David Spring, the retired 61-year-old former train driver from Sutton who has never been in trouble with the law even once in his life, but confronted the police at a protest outside Downing Street, even though footage shows that he did absolutely nothing violent. Sellafield worker Lee Joseph Dunn, serving 12 weeks for sharing 3 memes. And now 67-year-old pensioner David Notley of Essex, who has been locked up for 20 months for chanting "You're not English anymore" at police officers. As Darren Grimes pointed out, all this is doing is creating more resentment and feeds the growing narrative that there is two-tier justice in Britain. And once these unfortunate folk who have never made a mistake in their lives until now are inside, locked up, some of them for up to 3 years, look at the reception they can expect.
And people are being told that if they do appear, whether they're pleading guilty or not guilty, they're very unlikely to get bail. And if they do end up in prison, somebody who knows about these things told me that, any right-wing, far-right protester landing up in jail, they can expect a pretty cold reception from what he says are Asian gangs inside prison who will be looking out for them.
As this meme from Alex Armstrong points out, Keir Starmer has been far from consistent on so-called rioters. On one side, he took the knee for the BLM rioters and defined them as being a defining moment. On the other side, "You're all racists, go to jail," to the white working class so-called rioters. We know two-tier care is making these folk political prisoners to try and shut down dissent. He might be thinking it will work. And in the short term, he is probably right. But the Prime Minister is scarily out of touch with the majority of his population, and that is unlikely to end well. To discuss this further now, it's time for the Uncancelled Interview. And today I am delighted to be joined by the eminent cultural historian, academic, author and political commentator Philip Kiszely, who has found himself investigated for wrongthink. He is now a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, and it is a delight to have him on Outspoken. Philip, thank you so much for being here today. What did you make of Keir Starmer's reaction in Northern Ireland yesterday, which yet again was to shut down any discussion about why there might be discontent on the streets of Britain, and instead to decry anyone really who feels discontent, certainly any of the folk who have been arrested and about to be locked up for posting a meme, a political meme. He simply declared them racist.
Yes, indeed. Well, Dan, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show. It really makes you think, doesn't it, that the first thing you should do when you think about wrongdoing, crime, people who are acting out of character, the first thing you should do is ask why. But that is precisely what the government is not doing. They're not interested in why these things are happening, why people like Julie Sweeney, who's never done anything wrong in her life, is a 53-year-old carer from Cheshire, for God's sake, why she all of a sudden is taking to Facebook and typing crazy, ridiculous, awful things. Sure. But what's going on there? What's happening with her? It's the same in Ireland. I mean, we know that Ireland is changing so rapidly. The cultural change in Ireland is happening at such a rate of knots that people can't keep up. And the truth is that the stark reality is people are frightened and people are angry. And when you get that combination and you don't listen, the only thing you do is threaten them. It's as you said before, Dan, it can't end well. These things never end well. We look, you can see precedents throughout recent history, actually. When people aren't listened to, they act up. These threats are so extreme that, as you've said, even Elon Musk is taking notice of them and saying that they're all Orwellian. We are moving towards an Orwellian society. One of the things that we really want, I think, and one of the things that these people want is, one, to be listened to, okay, one, to take their concerns seriously, but also to live in the real world. Because what we're not dealing with reality. What Keir Starmer is reacting to is something that frankly isn't real. These people aren't racist. The far right doesn't have any kind of political footing in this country. It hasn't done for years and years and years. There's no force like the National Front or the BNP anymore. People are just frightened and fed up of ridiculously quick cultural change, and they're fed up of not being listened to.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more. And of course, there are going to be real consequences to this decision by Starmer. And let's just be frank, even though the judiciary is meant to be separate from the executive in a Westminster system, we know that it is the clear direction from Starmer, former director of public prosecutions, that is seeing people like Julie Sweeney being locked up. That is going to have a consequence, because we've already seen evidence, Philip, that these criminals, these career criminals who are about to be released early from prison, and actually some of them are not even being jailed at all, even though they have more than 100 convictions, they are already reoffending at higher rates. So actually, society is just going to get more unsafe because of this decision by Starmer to crack down on behaviour by the English working classes.
I mean, this is... it echoes other things that are happening in society. When you give me that scenario there, essentially it's a safeguarding scenario, isn't it? What are you going to do? Are you going to put your politics and identity politics first and say, well, let's get rid of these people we don't want and let's put them in prison? The only way we can really seriously do that, because our prisons are massively overcrowded, is to just let people out. And essentially, that's what they're doing. In the clip you showed before, there was no sense of a serious response to safeguarding. And it makes me think of all the other things that the radical left are pushing through the agenda of our culture at the moment. And I'm thinking particularly about gender, the trans agenda, and education, okay? There are two things there that's happening. One is affirmation and the other is safeguarding. Affirmation is completely overriding safeguarding. And what we're getting now is this in the criminal justice system, okay? So my fear, Dan, is that when something dreadful happens, when these people who should be in prison are out of prison and the people who shouldn't be in prison are in prison, when people really get hurt outside and inside, they are not going to acknowledge it. They are not going to do anything about it. Things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. We're stumbling towards real crisis here. And I hear myself talking about this, and I've talked about it on other platforms and other shows. And I think to myself, am I over egging the omelette here? Am I being over the top? And no, I'm not, because the facts are there. We're having criminals being taken out of prison so innocent people can be put in prison. And when I say innocent, yes, okay, they've committed crimes. They've said things on Facebook that they shouldn't say, and maybe they should be punished for it. Okay, I'm okay with that, but they shouldn't be going to prison. Julie Sweeney shouldn't be going to prison.
No,
and it isn't just
they have been humiliated on a national scale. They feel deeply embarrassed by what they have written. But surely we should live in a society where, unless you are specifically inciting violence against an individual or an actual place, then you should be able to say whatever you want on social media. Now, look, if the individual platforms which are privately owned decide to remove you, I guess that is a separate conversation. But in terms of criminalizing controversial speech, and the left are loving this at the moment, but be very careful, because this is a slippery slope, and it's a slippery slope into totalitarianism.
I think what's going to happen is, and again, this is one of those things that I never would have said 2 or 3 years ago, but I find myself saying quite a lot now. We are slipping into totalitarianism, and I think what's going to happen is the authorities, and that's how I think of them, the authorities. I think what's going to happen there is that they're going to look at retrospectively at what we've said on Twitter and on Facebook and on, God help us, on television and platforms like this. And they're going to say, and they're going to come to us and say, you said this in 2021, you said this in 2022. It's going to be retrospective. We are in a kind of cultural revolution here, a form of cultural revolution, which is in a way the antithesis of the 60s. That was the last big cultural revolution. What we're seeing here is this, it's not a slippery slope. We're hurtling towards.
Yeah, we're there.
Right.
After 6 weeks.
Yeah, we're hurtling towards
after 6 weeks.
Yeah. I think one of the things is people don't realize. I mean, my father was Hungarian, and when I grew up, I used to go back to Hungary in the 1980s when I was a little boy, and I saw it. I saw the regime there. I saw the anger and fear on people's faces. People wouldn't say anything in public, but as soon as they got behind closed doors, they said it all, and they resented the regime and they hated the regime. And that's what's going to happen here. Don't forget, Starmer and the government is kowtowing to a minority. The majority think as we do, okay? The minority is the loud, vocal, obnoxious minority. These are the people that work in universities, Dan. These are the people...
You know about them.
Servants. I know about them. These are the people who work in media. You know about them too,
oh, yes.
Okay? So they're a minority, okay? And they're vocal. The silent majority is doing nothing. And my fear is that if they carry on doing nothing, it's going to be too late, because once you start down this slippery slope, there's a point of no return. And when you get to that point of no return, I think we're very close to it. When you get to that point of no return in terms of totalitarianism, things move very, very quickly.
Yeah, and they are moving quickly. And actually, I wanted to point out some of the protests that are going on, because of course people are very nervous. They're very nervous to be on the streets. They're very nervous to post on social media platforms. But folk like Douglas Murray and Father Calvin Robinson, who will be here tomorrow, are encouraging English people to continue to get on the streets as long as the protests stay peaceful. But it's a fine line, isn't it? So I want to show you an example of some folk who did that in Bournemouth.
None! I don't want them! I can't have one more house! refugees not welcome here anymore.
And again, Philip, I would say there's quite a fine line there, because actually, under this new Orwellian approach, actually, is it considered hate speech? Is it considered inappropriate if folk are yelling refugees are not welcome here? But I wanted to point out and link that clip to a post on X of yours that I was quite taken by, where you asked how you felt about being in Labour's Britain in 2024, but you said that you were up for the fight. You said there have been times of late when I've had no fight in me. In January, for example, I didn't care about anything. I couldn't see a future for myself, let alone anyone else. So I understand why people feel so bloody down about authoritarianism, doublethink, censorship, cancellation, victimization, and racist identity politics. We have no choice, though. We can't let the most moronic regime in British history get away with it, nor can we ignore the loons cheering from the sidelines. So given that's how you feel, and I think that's great, and by the way, as you know, we've gone through a very similar experience over the past year in terms of being cancelled and coming back, and in some ways, actually, it's a liberation, isn't it? Because once you are cancelled, you actually have far less to lose in some ways. But what should ordinary folk do who are sitting at home, nervous now about whether to even make a post on Facebook, nervous about whether they can go to a protest march? What can they do?
Okay, well, first of all, what they shouldn't do is get sacked and end up on the dole for the next 30 years. Okay, I think that's, they've got to be careful. And so what we have to do is we have to think of ways, of strategies and methods of protest which actually work. Okay, and I think we need to be able to know at a particular moment, because this will change all the time, what the line is, how far we can push it. Okay, and I think we need to be able to fight back and say, I was just looking at that clip that you've just posted there, Dan. Okay, that's people waving flags of St. George, okay, and chanting. Think about all of the Saturday hate marches in London and all over the country. People waving Palestinian flags, people waving signs with the Star of David being put in a bin, absolute gross anti-Semitism every week since October the 7th.
And no action taken.
And this is a response to a pogrom. Okay, so I think we have to bear that in mind. And I think one of the things that people have to do is they just have to learn, and they have to read, and they have to understand what's going on. And we need to be able to take a lead in that, I think, people who are public figures, who are commentators, and we need to be able to be clever, like Douglas Murray, like Jordan Peterson. And we really need to be able to twist the narrative and show the lies that are happening. And, you know, I'll be out there waving a flag of St. George. I'm more than happy to do that. And I'm happy to stand my ground. And I think if many of us do it, and we do it sensibly, and we don't break the law, they can't lock us all up. The point is, we mustn't be silenced. And it's as I said in that tweet, it's really easy to be despondent and downhearted. You and I know we've been through pretty rough times. I mean, yours was much worse than mine, but there were times in January where I thought I had no future. I thought I couldn't afford to pay my mortgage. I thought I was finished in my career. And I actually visited a car park. I wasn't going to throw myself off the top of it, but I spoke about this in a speech to the New Culture Forum. I was incredibly depressed because I just couldn't see a future for myself. I think generally people feel that way about British culture. It feels as though we're taking something beautiful, we're taking something that we built for generations and generations, and it seems we're throwing it out and replacing it with crap. And we must be able to rally ourselves and be able to speak in public in a way that's effective. And that isn't throwing abuse, and that isn't, you know, saying the things that people have been saying on Facebook that they've got locked up for. What we should be doing is being clever and being angry and putting our fear aside.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very inspiring, that. But one of the problems is, Philip, we know how entrenched the two-tier justice is under this new government. And I want to talk about this appalling Home Office post on X, which showed the faces of a number of folk who had been arrested over the course of the so-called rioting. There you can see it, which had the headline, "These criminals will feel the full force of the law." Now, of course, that is completely outrageous for a government department to be posting something like that on social media, given that no justice has yet been done. The vast majority of the people in that photo have presumably not been to court, certainly not been found guilty. And as Lee Anderson, the Reform UK MP, wrote on X, innocent until proven guilty. Well, it appears not since Labour took charge. Check this tweet from the Home Office sent out last week, which in my opinion is disgraceful. Then check out my letter to the Home Secretary. We cannot allow the state to assume anyone's guilt until they've had a fair trial. They are not criminals until they've been found guilty. Hopefully our judges will see through this. And sure enough, Lee Anderson has written to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, making this point. But Philip, to me, what this shows is just how much in lockstep Slippery Starmer's government is going to be with the blob, the Snivel service. And it's terrifying.
It's really frightening. First of all, we don't live in France. Okay, we're not guilty before we're proven innocent. It's the other way around. Yeah. So I'm so appalled that the Home Office has said this, but the really, really appalling thing is that I'm not surprised at all. Right, I'm not surprised at all that they will do that, because if you think about it, it's not just about two-tier policing, is it? It's about two-tier everything. Okay, so if you have certain political opinions, you are a second-class citizen. It's getting more and more the case that if you are, white, male, heterosexual, and middle-aged, then by God, you really are a second-class citizen. And there are so many of us. If you are working class, you're a second-class citizen. There are so many of us. We're not just getting two-tier policing, we're getting two-tier everything. And this is one of the things that I think we really need to make a stand on and fight back against. So many people have just said, well, I'm not paying the BBC license fee, for example, because they hate me, right? The BBC hates me. So I don't want anything to do with the mainstream media. I'm not paying the license fee. There are platforms like this, there are platforms like New Culture Forum and all of those things. I can get all my news and it's unfiltered and it's much more accurate here. That's one thing, okay? The second thing is, if you're getting two-tier policing, then you're getting two-tier education, you're getting two-tier council, you're getting two-tier, local government, you're getting everything. So stop en masse, maybe, paying your council tax. That might be a really important thing to do. Hit them where it hurts. Why should I pay the same as everybody else when I'm being treated differently, when I'm considered guilty before I'm proven innocent?
No, indeed. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at the political climate, right now it feels like there is no official opposition. The Conservative Party has gone missing. And so it is Reform UK that I believe is representing how most ordinary folk feel. As a result, you will be aware, Philip, that the mainstream media has become obsessed with bringing down Nigel Farage. He's been criticised in the most strident terms again today because he's going to go to the US for the second time since becoming the MP for Clacton as the keynote speaker at this Saturday's Keep Arizona Free Summit. Of course, the mainstream media also furious that he's been paid an upfront deposit of nearly £12,000 for the speech. But we have a two-tier media in this country, don't we, Philip? Because it's the weekend, number one. Number two, there are MPs travelling around the world for spurious reasons all the time. And I have a feeling the people of Clacton will be pretty proud of the fact that Nigel Farage is such a big deal in the US. But what do you make of the witch against Farage at the moment?
Well, it just in the latest iteration of this, the latest wave, it started immediately the day after Hare Hills, didn't it? You remember the riots at Hare Hills in Leeds. And I just live really quite near there. And then Alex Sobel, the Labour MP, immediately the day after started blaming Nigel Farage for it. And then we got this ridiculous narrative where all of a sudden Nigel Farage was stirring up social media, so it's all his fault. So we go from this very frightening civil unrest, which we need to talk about and we need to understand. We need to get to the root of what's going on there. No, none of that. It's the same old thing. We just go to the narrative, and it's goodies versus baddies. It's a Manichaean evil versus goodness narrative that we always have. And you just need to pick the villain, okay? And Nigel Farage is always the villain. You know, he hasn't done anything. He was nowhere near there. He was perfectly within his rights as an MP to respond to the outrageous stuff that was going on the street. And yet they just take all of the important stuff away, all of the things that they should be analysing and thinking about and discussing. No, they just move it to Nigel Farage. But the worst thing is they had the Green Councillor of Hare Hills, who's an Islamist and a sectarian. Okay, and yes. Immediately the mainstream media are making him out to be a hero. Mm-hmm. So you've got a fairy tale version of current affairs, and it's frightening because it's so simplistic. Okay, it isn't the real world. This is what I was saying before, and I think we both had a taste of this. We're not even talking about policy. We're not even talking about politics. We're talking at the most basic level of what's going on, and are we seeing the same thing? Because 2 days or 24 hours after something happens that's a major event that we should all be concerned about, the narrative moves on to something that is completely different, and it's almost as if it's never happened.
Yeah, totally.
So this idea of I'm concerned about reality. What's going on here?
Absolutely. This is something I have been so conscious of for a long time, and it especially happens any time that there's a tragic event, usually involving some form of Islamist terrorism. Immediately, the authorities and politicians will say after the event, this isn't the time to discuss this, we've got to grieve. So you grieve for a few days. By that point, the police say, well, of course you can't talk about what's going on because we're investigating this. Then the perpetrator is charged, and of course you legally can't talk about it because of contempt of court. By the time said person has got to court and been found guilty, the world's moved on. And what it means is that we never actually have the discussions that we need. And instead, Philip, we're having ridiculous discussions like this in the Daily Telegraph today. Welsh warned over racist buildings. Staff will be instructed in critical whiteness studies. Joanna Williams posted about this. There's something medieval about this declaration that buildings bear the mark of original sin and must be avoided or ritually cleansed with formulaic statements. But as ridiculous as it sounds, this is the sort of thing that the Labour administration are going to be focusing on. It's woke tyranny, isn't it?
It's woke tyranny, and we shouldn't be surprised because they've signalled this for years and years and years. Remember when the countryside, for example, was racist? What they're doing here is they are pathologizing the bricks and mortar of our own culture. They are presenting a history that is, again, a fairy tale. It's one-sided. It's a saga of woe. And the whole scenario is just so absurd, isn't it? You imagine these Welsh librarians thinking, oh, well, what building are we going to meet in? We're going to meet in this primary school. Oh, we can't. The primary school's racist. It's absurd. We know it's absurd. But my fear is that we get used to this. We get used to these stories coming time after time after time. and they become normalized and we don't do anything about it. We must remember, again, this is the fight back that I'm thinking about very seriously. Okay, every time we see one of these stories, we really have to push back, because it is the pathologization of our culture, and it's bricks and mortar. If the bricks and mortar go, if the buildings go, if the listed building, I'm in a listed building now, if this goes, that's part of our collective memory will disappear, and that's part of our identity. It's so important. As a cultural historian, this kind of stuff really sends a shiver down my spine, because it's obliteration. That's all it is. It's obliteration.
It is. Obliteration, a great word. What I love is that there is one man in the comedy world who is pulling all of this madness together at the moment, Andrew Lawrence, and he has done a brilliant job mocking and pillaring Starmer's performance in Northern Ireland that we started the show with. Let's have a watch.
White working class people are intolerable. They've been brainwashed by misinformation, they're clearly racist, and they do not represent the modern, forward-looking Islamic caliphate that I know that this country can be. So I'm very pleased to be locking them all up. I'm proud to tell you that 2,000 prisoners are going to be released in a single day next month. I'm releasing these prisoners in the interests of public safety. Sex offenders, violent criminals will be released en masse to create vital space for white working class protesters who've been angrily waving Union Jacks about, stealing flip-flops from Shoe Zone, sausage rolls from Greggs, bath bombs from Lush, or quite simply writing naughty things on the internet. So far, we've arrested more than 1,000 people for complaining about mass uncontrolled immigration, and we're just getting started. And I'm here to tell you that if you want to commit any real crime, now is your opportunity, because our police and judicial system are far too busy arresting and handing out prison sentences to my political opponents to worry about actual criminals.
So surreal, but so brilliant, isn't it, Philip?
Well, I mean, I see it, and it's one of those things. It's just so accurate. You know, I'm looking at Starmer, and more I'm seeing this automaton that is just speaking and delivering this ideology and this identitarian politics, which so few of us buy into, and most of us are genuinely frightened of or angry about. You know, so I think that one of the real weapons, you know, we're talking about fighting back, and a lot of this interview has been about fighting back. How do we do that? Okay. One of the weapons we've got is humor, satire, you know, sending this kind of stuff up. And we've got to do it.
Because it is ridiculous.
And also because you may have noticed over the last 10, 15 years that humor and comedy on the mainstream media just isn't funny anymore.
No.
That's the major problem. So it's great that we are getting comedians and satirists who are sending up the people who need to be.
Let's reclaim it.
As opposed to led by donkeys who can only send up the Tory party for 5 years.
And are very unfunny. And what we need is some of that American attitude, because you're completely right. If you look over the pond, it was Dave Chappelle that actually finally proved how ridiculous trans extremism was. It was the South Park creators that finally proved to the world how ludicrous Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are. And on that note, actually, Philip, do stand by, because I also want to bring in now our royal mastermind, Angela Levin, to talk about the other big breaking story today. It is connected, though, of course. King Charles arrived in Southport for the first time after the massacre. And this was a very significant visit, given that we remember the last time one of our leaders was in Southport, and I'll show you the footage later, but Keir Starmer was very badly heckled. So what response was the monarch going to get during this visit today? Well, take a look at this. And then as he went to meet the public, some of them actually yelled out to him, "Thank you for coming." Watch. Now, you couldn't get a more stark contrast to what happened to Starmer when he showed up in Southport. Watch this.
How many more children have died in our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something?
Time to change, Starmer.
Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? What's shameful? Bye-bye. You got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Our children! Go away!
I just found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter.
So, Angela Levin, great to have you. Look, I'm not comparing Charles to Starmer. Of course, they are very different figures in public consciousness. However, this was still a bit of a risky visit for the monarch today. He will be delighted with that reaction.
Well, I mean, I think you do see that you can be compassionate whatever job you've got. The fact that he was in and out in 1 minute and just take that time to put some flowers down is actually appalling. He didn't speak to anybody. You don't have to be a prime minister to actually show compassion. But the king is somebody who is very compassionate and he feels for it. He times it very well as well. Royals don't go straight away after there has been something terrible happening because they feel they get in the way and the police have to look after them or guard them rather than anything else. But he's waited his time. It's now calmed down slightly and he went. And the reception was wonderful because they do care. They do want, I mean, we do want our royals to help us in difficulty. We've seen it with the late Queen, and King Charles is the same, that you care about individuals and they are your subjects and you need to show that. And he does it very well. He seemed actually to be quite fit. He walked up the stairs very quickly. He looked quite well. And when somebody asked him, "How are you, sir?" he said, "I'm not too bad." So that's being careful. You know, not what not too bad is, but, you know, he obviously wasn't going to say, but he means well. And I think he did very well. And he's going to invite the 3 families whose daughters died to London and to the palace. And I think that's also a marvellous gesture because although you can't bring these children back and you can't ever get over the pain, that you can think that somebody very important is taking the trouble to help you. And you can see, you know, the palace, which you would never do that before. And Camilla is also very good at talking to people who've had terrible problems and they can feel some sort of comfort, which they very much deserve.
Yes, you're right. It's tomorrow, actually, that he's going to be meeting with the family members of the 3 young girls who tragically lost their lives after being killed in that barbaric manner. So that will happen, as you say, at the palace. I believe some folk are also meeting Taylor Swift at her concert in London tonight because, of course, the dance class was a Taylor Swift themed class. Philip, what did you make of the reception that Charles got today and the contrast between his time in Southport and Starmer's time?
Well, I thought it was actually very moving. I was just watching the footage there and I felt myself, you know, get quite emotional about it. There's something about that connection between monarch and people, and we saw it. You know, we just saw it there. We saw the essence of it. It's so lovely to see such a positive exchange on the streets, and as you say, Dan, the juxtaposition, the contrast with Starmer, who just marched in and marched out, was something to behold. Now, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and we had a discussion on the New Culture Forum about, what should the king do, and should there be a royal intervention of any kind? And I think they've got it just right. It's a gesture that's very personal, that's about individuals and that's about people. It wasn't. I was frightened that he was going to make a speech or something. It just seemed as though it was, as Angela says, perfectly timed, and everything about it. I was just proud of it, basically.
I agree.
Can I just say, the only thing he said that we could hear was, "Aren't these flowers wonderful? And it's so lovely to see them, and all the teddies." Oh, you do. I felt, really tearful on that.
Yeah.
But straight to the heart.
But I'm also proud of Charles for listening to advice, because this is why the late Queen Elizabeth II was so wonderful, right? But we do know, Angela, as Philip points out, he was considering giving a speech. I think that would have waded into a very thorny political area, especially after he criticised the Rwanda scheme. We know where he stands on the issue of immigration. Actually, this was pitch perfect. You don't need to say much. You need to be a unifying figure, and today he was.
Yeah. I think he was wonderful. And I think that he might have been in pain, he might have been exhausted, but it was nothing about him. He didn't start telling you about him. He just wanted to be close to his subjects. And for that, we're very grateful.
Yeah. And it does also show, doesn't it, Philip, that Starmer really got the tone wrong. He got the tone wrong because it wasn't just about the timing. It was the fact that he refused to speak to the citizens of the UK during that visit.
It was almost as though he was angry that it had happened, and he just wanted to be able to make political capital out of it. What can I do? Oh God, this has happened. What can I do? I know I'll have a go at the far right, and I'll create the far right so I can use them in future. I don't think I'm being unkind there.
Actually. Well, no, because Philip, sorry to interrupt, but part of my theory, and obviously we don't know this for sure, but my theory is that Starmer was so angry at the reception he got in Southport, it actually sparked part of his decision and his rationale behind deciding to go hard on the far right. Whereas I do not believe that the people who were heckling him in Southport were members of the so-called far right. One of them, Philip, we know for sure, was a best friend of someone whose 9-year-old was stabbed. So actually, it was locals who were just expressing genuine anger.
I think what we see in that footage, Dan, and I've seen it a couple of times, I always think the same thing. Okay, we see Starmer there making an enemy of the British people.
Yes.
We also see the real deep humanity in King Charles. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of King Charles. I adored the late Queen, but I said before, and you said, I was that we were proud when we saw that, and I was proud of the monarchy. I was proud of the response because it was a human response. It was a simple response, and it was, "How are you?" It had humility, which was precisely the opposite.
Totally. And I hope for Charles, firstly, that it gives him a boost, because I wasn't heartened by what he said about his health. I do think he's suffering very badly. Not too bad. It's hardly a ringing endorsement, is it? So I hope he was boosted by that, but I hope that he also sees that actually he must be a unifying figure. Yes, he likes Keir Starmer a lot. Yes, they hang out a bit privately. He seems to be politically aligned, but actually he needs to be a unifying figure. He needs to keep away from politics and connect with the people in the way that he did today, because as you said, it was emotional and pitch perfect. But look, Angela Levin, stand by. But thank you very much to the brilliant Philip Kiszely, a great man, eminent cultural historian, of course, academic, author, political commentator, and senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. Hope you will come back very soon.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Now, Angela is staying with us, though, because in just 1 minute, did Meghan Markle fall out with the Colombian Vice President, Francia Marquez? And why is the MSM not reporting on a bizarre video showing something going down between them? We're going to analyse with Angela and touch the story that the MSM don't want to go anywhere near. That is in just a moment. First, though, what is so important about being independent is that I'm only ever going to tell you about products that I use and truly believe in and that I think can improve your life. So that's why I use Verso. As you may know, I've entered my 40s and I am much more conscious about staying healthy. I think you'll understand if you're in your 40s or 50s, age becomes a much bigger thing. So after a very stressful year, I've decided to think about ways that I can stay fit and as sharp as possible while still living a good life and being busy and engaged. So I'm doing lots of the right things like exercising, trying to do my diet right. But scientists like David Sinclair have proven that we can now actually reverse aging with interventions that go beyond healthy habits. So for me, I wanted a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, but one that was backed up by solid evidence. And that solid evidence is behind Cellbean by Verso, which has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels, which is the stuff that powers every cell in your body. I've been taking the product for a number of months now. I take it at the start of the day. I cannot tell you how transformative this product has been. Loads of things are so much easier for me. Fasting, energy, sleeping better. And apparently a lot of this is because Verso and Cellbean has blood sugar regulating effects which lead to fewer cravings. This has taken years off me. I would love you to experience the same thing. And the great news is that Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced, which guarantees you are getting exactly what you pay for. I'm very excited because Verso was the first ever sponsor of Outspoken, that if you head right now to bui.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order. You just need to make sure that you enter the coupon code Outspoken when you hit the checkout. I've put the link in our YouTube and Rumble description, but I will repeat, buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code Outspoken and take years off your life. But now back to the show, and it's time for our Royal Mastermind. Angela Levin joins me again. Now, Angela, wow. We've had this Colombian tour between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, where they were invited by the Colombian Vice President, Francia Marquez. And of course, they have tried to manipulate the coverage. They have only released footage that they have approved. Much of the footage comes without any audio on whatsoever. But the great thing is, Angela, when there is citizen journalism and there are folk with their mobile phones trying to look out for what really goes on, you get a different side of the story. And for the past couple of days, I've been looking into suggestions that Meghan Markle may have had a falling out with the Colombian Vice President, Francia Marquez, who invited her on this tour. And there is a bizarre video that the MSM has not reported on at all that seems to back this up in some way. Just before we have a look at it, Angela, let's set this up. What have you heard? What do you make of what is potentially going on between Meghan and the VP?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you are a journalist and you watch, you can see lots of things as well. It doesn't always need speaking. I thought the whole thing has been a nonsense, really. The vice president fell for Meghan on a Netflix 6-hour moan between him and between Harry and Meghan, and she thought that we were both following the same road in life. Well, absolutely not. You can see that by looking at them. But it began very well. Meghan gave her a huge hug, which I thought was rather inappropriate to do it to someone you'd never met before, and you're sort of semi-royal. But also that it was very wrong for Meghan to wear clothes that were completely unsuitable. And the second day she wore a skirt that was slit right up to the top of her leg. And initially she put it the cloth over her leg, and then she pushed it away so you could really see right up almost to her thigh. And there was the vice president looking down at it and looking at her with horror on her face. And I think that's where it began, that she thought, well, perhaps I've made a mistake and we're not anywhere near on the same road. And then a bit later, which I'm sure you've got some sort of pictures of, her husband, the vice president's husband, went very close to Meghan, and she moved a little bit more and more closer and closer till they were just about touching. And then she gave him a kiss and a huge hug, but the vice president rushed over, pushed him out of the way so she could stand between Meghan and her husband. And Harry actually helped and took Meghan's hand and slightly pulled that. So we've got a difference. It's usually Meghan pulling his hand, but this time Harry pulled it. And if you look at it very closely, it was absolutely incredibly inappropriate to do that. And I think that many of the papers haven't done that because it is pretty vulgar. And they want to keep away from that. They're very, very cautious about Meghan at the moment, and they don't want to get in any more trouble. But, you know, you and I, we can go and say what we like, really.
Well, yes, we're independent. That's one thing. And also we have to report the truth, don't we? So you have set that up absolutely perfectly, Angela. What I want to do now is show this footage. We will commentate over it and people can make their own decisions. So what you will see here, if we just run this now, and what you will see here is Meghan approaching the vice president's husband. She goes in for the kiss, and then you see the vice president seems to almost lunge at her, and Harry steps in immediately, grabs Meghan's hand. But certainly there's been something going on. So there you can see Meghan walks in, gives the hug, boom, boom. And we've paused in that moment where Harry actually puts his hand in, Angela, seemingly to get involved. Now, of course, we don't know what was said. We don't know what else has gone on between these two because, of course, there was lots of dancing and that sort of thing. And we should absolutely stress that we are not suggesting that there was anything inappropriate. However, don't you find it bizarre that citizen journalists have found this incredible piece of footage, yet no one in the mainstream media has even asked the question? Yeah. And as you say, it wasn't the only moment where there seemed to be real tension between Marquez and Meghan, even though Marquez is apparently such a big fan of Meghan.
Yeah, well, she was before she met her. We don't know if she is now afterwards. But there's another picture, and this could be very nice, as you said, very friendly, very nice. But the husband is kissing her, Meghan, on the cheek, near the ear. I don't know if he whispered anything or not. And Meghan looked as happy as can be. This could have been really friendly, but it does look a little bit uncomfortable to me.
And it's just not what royal figures are meant to do, is it, Angela? There's always meant to be a degree of decorum, is there not?
Yes, but this trip was not royal, was it? It's phony royal.
And maybe that's proven the point.
Everything about it is phony and absolutely appalling, really, that they should do that. Because people are now saying, Colombians are now saying, what's been the point of it all?
And it cost them £1.5 million.
Yeah, £1.5 million. And they had 300 police there for them all the time, and also 14 cars if they drove anywhere. Well, I think for Meghan, it was absolutely wonderful. She was in charge of what was going on. She loved it. The weather was warm and she had a lovely time. But actually, if you can't give anything, you can't sort of deal make any deals with anything at all, then it's very difficult. I'm very concerned that, Harry was asked by the Vice President if he would apologise about the slaves. Now, he's in no position to be able to do that. And I am worried that if he does do that, he's going to put the royal family in a terribly difficult place, because there will be an argument and a discussion that I don't think will be very pleasant, because he's got no right to say that.
And he's already putting them in that position, though, isn't he? Because Marquez is actually one of the world's leading proponents of reparations. So actually, even just by the fact that he is associating with her so closely, is putting Charles and William in a completely impossible position.
Yes, it's very thoughtless. And I don't know how he answered, because, as you said, mostly it was turned off. You couldn't actually hear much that he would be saying. But I think it's all very, very left-wing, and they need to be very, very careful, because you can't take that responsibility. But I think Meghan has enjoyed it thoroughly, because she's worn, £90,000 worth of clothes, and she's been doing what she liked. She could speak a little bit of Spanish. And I think it's been both awful and quite nice for Harry. I think it's been awful because we've seen when Meghan was holding one hand and gripping him like she does when he was trying to speak to somebody, but she didn't want it, so she hung on, so he was pulled away. And the other thing that's really upset me was that during the Netflix program, Meghan absolutely put up the anger for many people when she mimicked the curtsy of the Queen. And she then put on a very silly voice, said, "Hello, Her Majesty," as if it was really rude. Even Harry had a sour expression on his face. But during this, Meghan was teaching, she complained about, why should you curtsy? What's so important that you have to curtsy? She made a big fuss about that. But then there were two little girls that she was teaching how to curtsy to her. I assumed because she said that she was a princess, otherwise why would she get them to do it? And I thought that all this is really breaking their chances, actually, because you just cannot behave like
and there I think we've got the footage there. And the thing is, Angela, there's no way that this little Colombian girl knew how to curtsy. So this was a setup, wasn't it? Someone told her to do it.
Yes.
And we're not stupid. This was all footage that was put out by Archewell and the Colombian government.
Yeah, she decided what she wanted there. And if you go through it very carefully, as I have, then a lot of the things that Princess Catherine likes to do. So it was a thing to say, look how I can do it so much better, and I'm so much more smiley, and I'm so much more beautiful, and look, I can do it all. And so many of the things were things that Catherine has done. And I just thought that was very spiteful. She's absolutely brilliant at doing things that have two sides. One is actually the thing, and the other one is really digging the knife into someone's back, but not quite enough that anybody can dare say anything.
Yeah, she was really cosplaying Catherine, actually, in lots of different points. There are suggestions too, Angela, that Meghan may have actually exaggerated how good her Spanish language skills are. And I want to show you a particular video where a woman is speaking to her in Spanish, and she doesn't seem to understand at all what's being said, and so quickly moves on and just says gracias. Watch this. Do you think she actually really can understand Spanish?
I don't know, probably a bit. But what was upset me again, if you're talking about Spanish, is that Harry had to start something in Spanish, and he just said, hello, thank you, what's your name, how old are you? That was what he'd learned to say. And he then stopped because he obviously forgot what he was supposed to say next. And he said in English to Meghan, "Will you please help me? I don't know what to say next." He said, "Oh," you know, that was so humiliating for him, so humiliating. And she laughed and she said, you say first. So he said it, and then she said in Spanish, and it went like that, taking turns. But I thought, you know, poor man, it's awful. You know, you feel nervous about a new language. And she shouldn't have made something of it. And this was, again, how she sort of mocks him and undermines him. And then when he has this incredibly humiliated facial expression, it does break your heart, actually. However much I get cross with him for behaving badly, I just think he's in such, there we are.
This was just the most telling photo of the whole tour, wasn't it? That's how Harry really feels. And there are a couple of lip readers who came in, Angela, and said that actually there were moments where Meghan would actually demand Harry hand, and he'd have to put his hand out. So she's very bossy to him in terms of actions and how things are portrayed on camera. But he can't hide it, can he? He can't hide his misery.
No, that's the thing about him. There's one of the nice things you could always tell when he was in a good mood or he wanted to look after someone, when he was with former people from the army. You know, he was very kind, and you can see that on his face. But now it's largely desperately unhappy, and he doesn't know what to do about it, and it is very, very hard for him. But I don't think you can be in a place where they start discussing slavery and money until the really affects his father and the royal family. And
but he doesn't give a damn about that, does he?
I do think now that they've got to make some sort of change, because if they've been to Africa, and that was very embarrassing. I think they learned from Africa, so they stopped saying anything, so nobody could criticize them for what they've said. They come and do this, and now I think they've got another one coming up in a few weeks' time. And there's Canada for the Invictus Games a little later on. And you can't have them pretending all this and taking it away from a family that actually at the moment is finding life very difficult. Instead of helping, they're making it worse.
Yeah, indeed. Now, look, there was criticism, Angela, of Harry on the first day of the tour because he looked really miserable and seemed to be doing everything possible to stay away from Meghan while getting very close to the interpreter. Now, some people have described his actions as being creepy and inappropriate. Let's have a look and I'll get you to react off the back. We'll just try and find this clip now. But while we're doing that, it was quite telling, wasn't it, Angela?
It was very telling. What was interesting was that Meghan wasn't talking, no one was talking to Meghan from either side. She didn't like that, so she's sitting there smiling. And the vice was talking to somebody on the other side, and Harry was talking to the person who was translating. Very nice, very charming, and laughing and joking. And it got a bit closer, and he suddenly, as a man does who fancies a woman, I think, from long ago for me, it put his arm round the chair.
Okay, well, we can watch now.
Okay.
Very bizarre body language, Angela.
Well, you don't do that, really. It's not appropriate. And Meghan actually, in another few takes, she actually tried to give him 3 bangs with her elbow, but I think he took no notice of it because he's quite far away, really. And they then sacked the translator. She wasn't seen anymore.
Meghan was like, get this woman as far away from my husband as humanly possible. And what was interesting is you did see a total transformation in terms of what they were like with each other in public after that first day. It was as if they'd been told, look, the cracks are showing here. So there was a very over-the-top public display of affection that came when they were in Cali, which is the home of salsa dancing. Watch this.
Yeah.
And they also released 2 pictures.
Passionate kiss at the end.
Yeah, and they released 2 pictures of themselves snogging as well. What did you make of it?
Well, I mean, it was just to show off. If people said they want to see how much they like each other, then they'd do this. It might have no feeling in it whatsoever. They're just showing off, aren't they? I mean, if they want to copy the King, Queen, and Catherine and William, they don't do that. So they got it all wrong. The other thing that I really liked, if I've got time to say this, is that when she was talking about women at the last day, and she wanted to advise these African women how they could work and be strong. What she knows about them, I really don't know. So she began by talking what she'd done at 11, which we've heard about 25,000 times, about seeing men not washing up. And it was an advert, and she thought they should wash up, and she wrote, and they changed it for anybody must wash up. Now she says that she did it. Well, actually she didn't. The whole class did it, and she did it once, and her father didn't think it was good enough, so he did it again. So this is, you think she was 11. She says that with great pride. Now she's 43. How can you keep going on about that amazing thing that she did? Surely she could be something else, something absolutely extraordinary. She did say about her daughter, Lilibet, that she's now found her voice.
Oh, yes, let's have a look at that, Angela.
Right.
We'll look at that moment, because in this speech, she also spoke about suffering and silence, which was a clear dig at the British royal family. So let's have a listen, and I'll get you to react after.
And I think in the small ways that women are doing that each day, and in the larger ways that we're doing that as a community, those are the elements that continue to inspire me to use my voice, because I also recognize how small it feels when you don't. It doesn't feel great to, as we've talked about, suffer in silence, or even just sit in silence, if in those moments you want to be heard, or if you have something to say. So I think part of the role modeling that I certainly try to do as a mother is to encourage our daughter, who at 3, she has found her voice. And we're so proud of that, because that is how we, as I was saying, create the conditions in which there's a ripple effect of young girls and young women knowing that if someone else is encouraging them to use their voice and be heard, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to create a very different environment than so many of us grew up in, where our voices were meant to be smaller. And now in raising them, we're changing the conditions in the environment where everyone has space to be the best version of themselves.
Angela?
Well, I mean, it's a complete load of nonsense. She's completely out of date. Women have a great opportunity in this world. You can choose whether you want to work full-time, part-time, be at home, work from home. You know, you've got many, many options as a woman. I think we should be very pleased. It's not, we expected this and it should happen. But also a child of 3, and I've had 3 of them. They shout. They might want more jam and they might want more sweets, and that is not finding your voice. I've never known a child of 3 who can actually control how they're going to be in the world.
No, they shouldn't.
But it's also about her. You see, it's all about her. She didn't know how to tell these people how to behave and how they should work. So she just always talks about herself, thinking that will help them. Of course it won't. They're in very, very different situations. She was in a palace, the greatest palace in the world, actually, the greatest royal family in the world. And it was very hard for her. I'm not saying it wasn't, but she can't expect that to work. With these people, 1 in 3 is poverty stricken. So they're not going to start saying, I want. They're going to just hope that they have food and that they are healthy. It's a different sort of line. This is not a Meghan line.
No,
this is people who have very difficult lives.
Of course, because we should point out over 35% of folk in Colombia live in abject poverty. I mean, real poverty. So they're not thinking about their 3-year-olds finding their feminist voice, or about online disinformation, or about AI, which is all the former royal couple wanted to talk about. They're thinking about how to put food on the table. But Meghan obviously uses these moments. It doesn't matter where she is in the world. She uses these moments to play on her victimhood. So speaking at this Afro Women in Power conference, the same one, not only did Meghan leave out Catherine and Camilla out of a speech praising strong women, she also claimed that she wasn't interested in the fight and wants to spread love, kindness, and generosity around the world. Watch.
Of the strong women that are around me, of course, my mother being one of them. I think life is full of surprises and can be quite complex. And we've talked about over the past few days, you finding your inspiration and this fighting spirit. And for me, we talked about the power of words as well. So much of how I approach things is through the lens of less about the fight, that's not interesting to me, and more about how do we show up in this space and wash things over with love and kindness and generosity. And we talked about this the other day, and of course that is part of that same spirit that you have in you. You see something wrong, you go to fix it. Maybe that's just a very female thing, whether it's a fan or something else. That's what we do, right? As women, we're multitaskers and we are fixers. And so when I try to look at the conditions in which will make women most comfortable in the space, that's multifaceted, and that includes finding ways to create political space where women's voices can be heard, in obviously business where women can have a seat at the table and be in positions of leadership, having examples as you do with your vice president.
She just has
we know all that, don't we? We know that women can go into politics and women can go into all sorts of things, anything really. But there's no love from her. She's torn up any love for the royal family.
And her own family.
Doesn't see her father.
No.
She has friends, and if they're no longer any use to her, it seems that she just drops them.
Yes.
So this is not love. This is not compassion. I think she's fooling herself.
And she spoke about her intentionality of now entering a chapter of joy, Angela. So I guess at least she admits that in the past it has been a chapter of misery. And as you say, a very odd time in your life to be miserable. When you're in the royal family, you're living in a palace, yet she was miserable. So maybe, do you believe her? Is she going to find joy now? Or was this all an act in Colombia?
really unkind of me, but I think she's one of those people who is never satisfied. There's never enough. There's never enough money. There's never enough expensive clothes. There's actually never enough of a biggest house, and never enough of getting her own will all the time. And I think there are women like that, and to me that seems that just like her, because I think after 4 years, after you've moved out of the being a royal, working royal for 4 years, you can't find real happiness, and you still are moaning, and like Harry, hanging on with your fingertips to complain and moan. And she's half threatening now, saying she's going to write something and there'll be no holding her back. Well, that's to upset all of us. But, why doesn't she write some amazing story? Why doesn't she write about something that's worthwhile? Not to go back to that time in her life, which she thinks was so terrible, because she's now one of the most well-known women in the world, one of the richest known women in the world, and she's got 2 children, a boy and a girl, 16 bathrooms, lots of sand and sea near her. I can't understand how you can't be grateful for what you've been given. Nothing's perfect. We all don't, have a grumble about some things are difficult, particularly now when finance is very difficult for many of us, women as well as men, and you just have to make the best. You can't go around grumbling. And she is grumbling and grumbling. And whatever she gets, the richer the piece of jewelry, nothing really pleases her.
Indeed. Brilliant summary. But look, stand by, Angela Levin. So much more royal news this week. But we're crossing to our Uncancelled after show now at www.outspoken.live. It is our membership section where you get half an hour of extra content every single day. So we're going to come off YouTube, come off Rumble, move with Angela to our own platform to continue the conversation, including whether Prince Harry is really happy at 40, why King Charles and Prince Andrew are falling out yet again, and did the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth, really say horrible things about Donald Trump? Should we really believe the Daily Mail on this? All you have to do is sign up right now at www.outspoken.live. Register, it's £5 a month. Then you'll get to watch half an hour of extra content every single day. Plus, allow me to keep making this independent news show. Do subscribe too on YouTube and Rumble. We're back every weekday at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you. See you on the after show with much more from Angela Levin.